So 2 weeks after the weekend-long performance that was Miami, F1 was headed into Europe for back-to-back races, with the first of those being round 6 in Spain, with cars back at the site of the initial pre-season shakedown test thing at the Circuit de Barcelona, Catalunya, a track that despite its history is now known best for producing races that make Abu Dhabi seem interesting. At the top of the standings, like the previous 4 races, it was Charles Leclerc and his Ferrari, but the gap to Verstappen was the closest it had been since the start of the season, with the Dutchman less than a race win away, just 19 points back. And in the Constructors, it was even closer, with Red Bull now having turned a 44-point deficit after Bahrain into just a 6-point gap. At the other end of the field, there were just 2 full-time drivers still on no points, one of which was Nicholas Latifi, who after demonstrating all the racing ability of, well, Nicholas Latifi, he was sitting 21st in the 20-car championship, a feat most recently completed by none other than Nikita Mazepin. And the other full-time driver at the back with nothing to show was Mick Schumacher, who's developing a bit of a knack for getting into a decent position and then throwing it all away. Hey guys, it's Taran and welcome to the On Track channel and to round 6 in Spain. As always, before we get going, do make sure to give the video a thumbs up if you enjoy, it always helps out with YouTube's algorithm, and don't forget to subscribe if you want to see some more F1 content. Now with that out of the way, let's get into my honest review of Formula 1 and the 2022 Spanish Grand Prix. So before racing in Spain, there was the Monaco Historic Grand Prix, where a load of old F1 cars were driven around the streets of Monte Carlo. Well, some of the cars, as one not making it all the way around was Niki Lauda's old Ferrari, driven by none other than Charles Leclerc, as it seems the curse of him not finishing at Monaco has traversed the world of modern single-seaters and time all the way back to at least 1974 and the year that old car raced. Elsewhere, and there were some track-related stories and updates as well. First off was Russia, which after being booted off the calendar because this guy is, well, this guy, it left a spot to be filled. Some suggestions were Turkey, which had filled in before, or Qatar maybe, which is joining permanently next year anyway, but F1 announced that there would be no replacement, which while maybe leaving some people disappointed, no race is still better than going to Sochi. And finally, in Barcelona there are a few changes around the facility, one of which was a snazzy new podium in the shape of the track. Well, the version of the track that doesn't include the chicane, a feature which over the past 15 years has become notorious for being the worst section of track on the calendar behind the entirety of Circuit Paul Ricard. Into FP1, and the thing to note was teams giving some drivers a chance in their cars, such as Williams and Nick de Vries in the FW44. This was one of the 2 mandatory sessions where teams would have to run young drivers, and given the connection that Nick has to Mercedes as one of their Formula E drivers, and the connection Mercedes has to Williams, he makes sense. Not to mention how last year there was a big push to get him into a seat, but with the way Latifi's been driving to start 2022, it's not exactly hard to make a case. As honestly, it's probably time somebody replaced the Canadian, though we have been saying that since about the end of 2020. And another team doing more of the same was Red Bull, with current F2 driver and team junior Juri Vips getting a session, still happy living life as a Red Bull junior before Horner and Helmut decide if he's worthy of Formula 1. But we weren't done there, as Alfa Romeo had also elected to give a session to someone else. Would it be the great youngster Teo Pourchaire, Sauber Academy junior and F2 leader going into the weekend? No, it was Robert Kubica. But all these stories were before getting onto the track, as once the cars were out of the garage, we got to see some upgrades, most noticeably on the Aston Martin, who had decided to bring a B-spec car, also known as this year's Red Bull, as after copying the Mercedes for 2020, it would seem they were at it again with the RB18.
Wow! If I had a nickel for every time I was doomed by a puppet, I'd have 2 nickels, which isn't a lot, but it's weird that it happened twice, right?
And we weren't quite done there, as for the rest of the day, the Red Bull pit wall decided to fight back by using green Red Bull cans. Oh, and Helmut Marko spouting that data had been downloaded from them, but this is Helmut Marko we're talking about, a very trustworthy source, said no one ever. Now to the track, where nothing happened, other than some cars blocking the Mercedes pair, who seemed to now have a car that no longer looked like it was competing in World Rally Championships. And the 2 drivers getting reprimands for that impeding was Fernando Alonso and Juri Vips, giving the young Estonian a 100% record for sessions with stewards' investigations. Into FP2, and it was kicked off by someone going off, that person being Lando Norris, running deep at turn 7 and sending his McLaren through the gravel. But at least Lando could continue with the session, which was something that Valtteri Bottas couldn't do, as his Alfa Romeo decided 10 minutes of the session was enough and packed up as he went down towards turn 1, sending the Finn for an early shower. Elsewhere, Mercedes did look to be a little improved, with both cars looking much better and generally being a bit quicker than they had been in the previous few rounds. which was soon backed up by the world's most unreliable insights, because if history tells us anything, AWS kinda tend to be a bit wrong when it comes to these things. Then towards the end of the session, the only real thing to note was Perez taking a little detour over the gravel, just like Lando, but action-wise, there still wasn't too much. I mean, it is practice in Spain, I don't know why I expected anything different. Kicking off Saturday with FP3 and a theme of smoky cars. First off was Pierre Gasly, forced to come in and miss the remainder of the session. This was after his car turned itself into a chimney, with smoke coming out from every possible location. But the issues for Gasly weren't anywhere near those down at Haas, as Mick Schumacher found his rear right brakes, well, on fire, which meant he too brought the car back in. Now, I'm no expert, but when you've got a car coming in with a real bad brake problem, maybe not the best idea to go sticking a man in front of it. But that's what they did, with the front jackman falling over out of the way to avoid being run over. And even when the car had stopped, the issues didn't end there, as the car kept burning, and still burning, with the eventual damage being a wrecked rear right side, leaving a question mark over if he would make it out for qualifying. After the Haas was sorted, there wasn't too much, other than an issue for Hamilton not being able to use the DRS. But once fixed, we got to see all the representative lap times, with the Mercs slotting themselves into 3rd and 4th, ahead of both Sainz and Perez, but behind Leclerc and Verstappen, with Charles leading the way by just 7 thousandths into qualifying. Into qualifying, and after the smoke/brake related incidents in FP2, all 20 cars were out on the track to set competitive lap times. 19 cars were setting competitive lap times, Latifi being off of his teammate, and last is really just a given at this point. But elsewhere, Red Bull were going and setting the early times, with Ferrari then responding, and both their drivers going to the top. Back towards the midfield, and there was something of note in the pit lane, with Aston Martin mechanics just deciding to send Stroll into the path of Lando Norris, with both cars narrowly avoiding a collision, saved only by the fairly wide pit lane. Fast forward to the end of Q1, and joining the previously mentioned Latifi was teammate Alex Albon, Fernando Alonso and both Aston Martins, meaning that after all the debate and back and forth regarding their new car design, when it came to actual pace, it did a whole load of nothing.
Easy top 3. If I'm not 16th!
Into Q2, and after putting on some fresh tyres, Mercedes were leading the timesheet, with the Ferraris and Red Bulls a little further back with scrub sets, before then setting faster times later in the session, with the top 6 all through fairly comfortably. And after everyone had set lap times, someone doing well was Mick Schumacher, as he sat inside the top 10. But could he make it through? Into Q3 for the first time ever? Yes, as it turns out. I mean, it was due to Lando Norris having a time deleted due to track limits, but still counts. And that lap deletion for Lando meant that he was out in 11th place, along with both AlphaTauris, Ocon and Zhou Guanyu. I kinda wish there was a bit more to be commentating on here, but it's Spain, there isn't. Next up Q3 and the top 10, including pole position, which if you hadn't heard, 23 of the last 31 race winners in Spain have come from pole position. So thank you very much Sky Sports for ramming that stat down our throats all weekend long. But onto the laps, and everyone except Charles Leclerc was setting one. This was because his Ferrari was pointing the wrong way at the final chicane. And with no lap for Leclerc, it left Verstappen at the top of the times after the first runs, followed by Sainz, Perez and both Mercedes cars. Then with just over 3 minutes to go, the cars were led out by Charles and his Ferrari, eager to get his lap in, and boy did he get his lap in, blitzing the times and moving himself ahead of Verstappen by over 3/10. But could Verstappen respond? He could not, with the Dutchman reporting power issues on his last lap. At this point, the only thing more consistent than Red Bull powertrains and reliability issues is the Toronto Maple Leafs and a first round exit. So with Verstappen unable to improve, it left Leclerc on pole, with Carlos Sainz only taking P3, and just to rub salt in the wound at his home race, the pole position trophy was presented by none other than Carlos Sainz Sr. And then behind those three was not the second Red Bull of Perez, but the Mercedes of George Russell, as he picked up the best qualifying result of the year for the team. On to race day, and it was a pretty even start for the front two, with Leclerc and Verstappen holding position. Behind them, however, well, Sainz kinda went into anti-stall, which meant that he dropped from 3rd to 5th by the first corner. But the big losers from the opening lap were Lewis Hamilton and Kevin Magnussen, as the pair came together with K-Mag trying to go round the outside of turn 4. The resulting contact sending him off into the gravel and giving Lewis a puncture, which meant he had to pit and rejoined a minute off of the lead. But what do greats do when faced with adversity? Do they dig deep and put their heads down, 100% focus and determination? No, they apparently asked to retire the car and save the power unit. Well, at least at first anyway. Back to the cars at the front, and a group that after lap 7 no longer included Carlos Sainz, with the Spaniard losing the rear all on his own, subsequently spinning off into the gravel. Seriously, what is it with him in the gravel this year? So far there's quite literally been a 50% chance that he ends up in it, but at least he kept it going and rejoined in 11th. This left the front four of Leclerc, Verstappen, Russell and Perez to settle into the race. That was until Max Verstappen also went off into the Turn 4 gravel while completely on his own.
You're joking. Not another one?
This little detour meant he rejoined behind Perez and Russell, which very quickly became just Russell, as without hesitation Red Bull pulled their version of Fernando is faster than you and moved Checo out of the way. But you'd assume with a far superior car that Max would get by easily. Well, not if his DRS had anything to do with it, as trouble with the Dutchman's system meant the rear wing was only opening some of the time, which also led to Verstappen screaming and complaining over the radio like a Karen that wanted to see the manager. But on one occasion, with DRS working, he got close enough to make a move down the inside, until Russell said no I don't think so and stayed ahead by swooping back round. This left Verstappen to stare at the Mercedes gearbox until he was brought in on lap 28, but not before there was some drama elsewhere, as in a tale as old as time, while on for the win, Charles Leclerc had engine problems, forcing him to pull into the pits and out of the race, losing a likely 25 points in the process. Back to the George Russell versus Red Bull fight, and with Verstappen now pitted and Russell out of the way, Perez could have a go again, with the Mexican making his way past and into the race lead down at turn 1, which yes, also meant for a very short amount of time, a Mercedes was leading the race. I did not expect to be so surprised when saying that this year. But with Perez past and Verstappen on a 3-stopping undercut, it meant that the battle for the win was now between the Red Bulls. Well, I say battle, but we all knew what was about to happen.
If he's quicker, we let him through.
And given Verstappen was on the fresher tyres, that's exactly what happened, with the cars swapping round on the entry to turn 4 on the 49th lap. And while yes, Verstappen was legitimately quicker, it would have been nice to at least see Checo allowed to fight for the win. So that basically cemented the top 2, but in behind it was still all to play for, as while Russell held 3rd, Sainz was now going after Bottas for 4th place. Oh, and remember how I said Hamilton was like a minute off of the lead on lap 1? Yeah, he was now chasing them both down. And on lap 58 the action began, with Sainz getting past on the main straight before on the same lap Lewis was past Bottas round the outside of turn 3. And he wasn't done there, as 2 laps later he made the move round the outside of Carlos Sainz for 4th place. And that looked to be where he would finish until the Merc power units decided they urgently needed cooling.
Come on, it is well on. Might be too on, might be.
This allowed Sainz back through to take 4th place, with Russell having a big enough gap to maintain 3rd, meaning he joined both Red Bulls on the podium, with Max Verstappen taking his 3rd win in a row, also meaning that after 6 races, Red Bull now led both the Drivers' and the Constructors' Championship. Anyways, that wraps up this video. Remember, if you haven't already, to give the video a thumbs up and subscribe if you want to see some more F1 content. But until next time, take care.